Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we talk about how to use mobile user acquisition strategies to grow your app quickly and capital efficiently. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, mobile growth leader and founder and CEO of the mobile growth consulting firm Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital-efficient manner. Our guest today on the Mobile User Acquisition Show is Andy Carvell, the founder and partner at the Berlin-based mobile growth consultancy Phiture. Before founding Phiture, Andy led the retention team at Soundcloud, where he helped drive some massive experimentation-driven growth. He's also known for his mobile growth stack, a framework that I've found impressive both in its comprehensiveness and simplicity. In today's conversation, we talk about in-app messages, which can sometimes be underappreciated as a retention strategy, especially compared to PNs and emails. Andy outlines why they work, when they work, and talks about the tremendous impact they can have. He gives the example of a 4,000% uplift in engagement that they helped drive even when these in-app messages were untargeted. I'm excited for an in-depth view into an underrated but very powerful strategy that this interview with Andy provides. I'm very excited to welcome Andy Carvell, co-founder at Phiture, to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you also because I feel like our paths have crossed virtually so often. And certainly your writings are very much held in very high regard, not just by myself, but so many people across the mobile space, starting from your mobile growth stack to everything else you've written since then. So this is something I'm very excited for today.
That's very kind of you to say so. Thanks for the kind words. And yeah, it's always great to know that people are getting something out of the stuff that we publish.
Absolutely. Yeah. And today we're going to talk about in-app messages and some of the wins you guys have unlocked using in-app messages. Get started. Can you tell us what in-app messages are?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this topic. I've been talking about in-app messages most chances I get lately, simply because I really believe they're like the golden channel for mobile right now. But yeah, so exactly what is an in-app message? It's essentially like a small user interaction unit that's delivered from a server-side platform, typically a mobile engagement platform like a Braze or a Leanplum or a CleverTap. And it's the way it looks and the way it behaves is really kind of down to the marketer that's deploying it and the capabilities of the delivery platform itself. So some platforms allow more flexibility with the formats, but typically we're talking about a pop-up or a modal window that kind of pops up and displays a message. Could have an image, typically some text and one or more buttons. Could be a full screen interstitial, could be something that just slides up like a little kind of slide up or pop over. Many different kind of formats really, but like the common denominator is it's something that's essentially overriding the standard interface of the app. And you can make them look however you want, particularly with, some of the platforms do allow you to sort of build out essentially what's a small HTML5 web view. And then you can even include like CSS and JavaScript and really make them look completely native, actually.
Indeed. So for a layperson, would it be fair to say these are the mobile equivalents of pop-ups?
Yeah.
Of course, the reality is probably more sophisticated, but at a very high level.
I think you can sort of simplify to that. I think that's the bit that's like kind of probably like easiest for people to understand. Yeah, like they're kind of segmented, triggered pop-up messages, essentially.
Yes, gotcha. When you think about ways in which you can target users of an app, users who already started using an app via lifecycle campaigns, in-app messages will typically impact users who are already using an app, as opposed to, let's say, PNs and emails that you can use to target people who may not be actually inside an app, right? So
Sure.
so I imagine that's an essential difference between how in-app messages work versus PNs and emails, which are sort of more well-known, sort of more mainstream, you could say. So with that context, what are some of the typical use cases or strategic goals for which you would recommend using in-app messages compared to other forms of retention strategies like PNs or emails?
Yeah, again, really good question. And I think, yeah, it's really important to sort of acknowledge the sort of different dynamics of these different channels that you can use, when kind of building out a retention strategy or a CRM strategy. So just like push notifications and emails, these things are typically deployed through an engagement platform or a marketing automation platform, which means that you get proper measurement of impact around what you're doing. The server-side deployment aspect allows you to, iterate quickly on new ideas and deploy things without an app store release. And you can target, either like all users, but you're right, absolutely, just the only ones that are going to see it are like inside the app. That's a key difference versus push and email, which are, channels which you can use to bring people back into the app. And you can segment down to like an individual user level, I guess one of the key differences before we get into the use cases would be with in-app messages. Not only are you only able to reach those active users, but there's also kind of like another dimension to it, which is like how these are actually triggered. Like typically you would trigger them on a certain event. That event could be app open, or it could be that you pop up or display this message right after a user has done a certain action or when they land on a certain screen. So you can show them like in a very contextual moment that's kind of a key part of the user journey. So yeah, back to your question. You're right, you can only reach those active users, although what you are able to do is chain them. One of the approaches we use a lot at Phiture is to use a kind of a multi-channel approach. So we might use a push notification or an email to get the user's attention, bring them back into the app, and then the segmentation would work basically on popping up that message like when they open the app, based on having them just clicked on that push or in-app email campaign. So you can kind of chain these campaigns together and leverage the strengths of the different channels. But then, in terms of the actual use cases, the kind of things that we've seen working really well, I mean, they're pretty numerous, but I'd say some of the ways that you can really leverage in-app messages that almost always works great. Onboarding. You can really kind of supplement your existing product onboarding by segmenting users who kind of haven't got to activation point or haven't sort of experienced or tried out certain features, by kind of like popping up a message and actually taking them straight to that feature, educating them about that feature. For the users who haven't tried it, upsell, I think, is the key one, for any kind of like monetization efforts, like conversion to subscription. Being, everyone's trying to do subscription apps these days. You can really iterate very quickly on your conversion messaging, your value prop, the benefits that you're pushing, and get a very measurable and quick kind of feedback loop in terms of what's working, and really improve your conversion rates. Content recommendation. I have an example from Blinkist. We worked with Blinkist recently to help them implement some in-app messages to do content recommendation. When they were recommending a sort of a promoted book that week, which wasn't even segmented, actually, they just wanted to do a quick test to go to the whole user base just to see, how valuable that would be to be able to push like one piece of content as like a promoted book that week. And there's like a 4,000% uplift in users who read that particular book after receiving that message. That I think is, super impressive, but also like you have to understand the dynamics of the messaging channel. We're basically getting right in everyone's face with a pop-up that says, hey, check out this book. So a lot of people are going to click it. But especially when it's new, there's probably also a little bit of halo effect there. But I think what was also super interesting from that experiment was there was a 6.5% overall increase in engagement with any book. So that was a really interesting kind of dynamic that we saw, is that by just pushing any content whatsoever, we saw an overall uplift, like on an aggregate uplift in engagement across the thing, so across the whole user base. So it seemed to just stimulate people to go and explore books in general, even if they weren't interested in the one that we promoted. find a couple of other use cases. I could go on all day, to be honest,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
surveys, I think, is a really big one, particularly since if you're kind of building slightly more advanced in-app messages, and you're using JavaScript, for example, you can ping results of surveys like straight back into your CRM system, which means that you're enriching that user profile with their response to a question, and you're doing that in real time, so you can immediately start segmenting them. So, a particular use case on of this, which we use a lot at Phiture, would be that we deploy like an intent collection survey. Like typically, it's always a good idea to learn more about like why your users are there, what are they hoping to get out of the app, and you can ask them that with like a simple like multi-choice question on the very first session of the app. We can store that information and then immediately start customizing them into like different onboarding tracks based on what they're there to do, or if it's a content app, then what kind of genres of content are they interested in. Some of that stuff you might eventually build natively into your onboarding flow in the product, but we find that there's a really quick way to like test and learn, and sort of rapidly prototype advanced onboarding flows that are super personalized.
Yeah, those were some very impressive numbers, right? Especially what you described with what you guys did with Blinkist. I'm wondering if that sort of uplift is perhaps because an in-app message is just a very virgin channel, right? If you're looking at PNs, I have 10 different PNs on my phone, but if I'm in the app, as you said, it's very in your face. It's hard to miss. There's just no competition for it. Do you think that explains why it's so effective?
I think it's part of it, right? I think you have to think about like what is an in-app message like really at heart. As I said, it's kind of like a small interaction with the user. So like you're essentially overriding the user experience while the user is literally got the phone out and they're like looking at the screen. So you've already got their attention, right? These other channels like push notifications and email, you're hoping to somehow get their attention at some point. There's like a little sound effect, like a ping, and hopefully they check their messages, or maybe they're going to read through their email inbox later. But these notification channels, they're about trying to redirect the user's attention. With an in-app message, you've already got the user's attention. And with that great power comes great responsibility, of course, because this is why designers often hate the idea of in-app messages. Like, usually if there's tension in the team, it's usually between the product or the design team and the growth marketing team that sees the value of this channel. Because when you've got somebody's attention, you can then direct them to another part of the app. You can deliver them a very segmented, very personalized message. But at the end of the day, you're getting up in their face and you're showing them something. So it better be valuable, And of course, you can measure the impact of that, so you can iterate towards higher value, higher conversion rate. But we routinely see like just insane conversion from in-app messages, just exactly because of that. And secondly, it's kind of, you have that responsibility to measure the results carefully and not just looking at the results you want to see, like how many people are clicking on the button or how many people are doing the action that you're trying to drive them to, but also the negative effects, like, are people uninstalling the app? Are people kind of churning out of the app after having received these things?
Indeed. And as you said, great power, great responsibility. And you touched in this conversation earlier on some of the segmentation that's so crucial to making in-app messaging work. Right? Even though it sounds like the win you had at Blinkist was just, even without the segmentation, you did say segmentation so crucial. I would imagine part of what you want to achieve via segmentation is understanding the probability of, let's just say, somebody lapsing and just reacting to it accordingly, or somebody who is kind of on the fence about making a purchase and showing them a tailored pop-up, tailored in-app message. Right? How do you think about this sort of predictive messaging?
I think it's like the next level, right? It's where everyone's trying to get to. There's a lot of kind of hype around, machine learning, churn prediction models, and propensity scoring in general. So it's also like a topic which I really love, and I've worked on quite a bit. Even in my days at SoundCloud, we were working on various propensity scoring models and like pre-calculation stuff. I think it's really fertile ground for that next level of personalization. I'm personally a bit wary about anybody who claims to sort of have built this on a sort of generic level, because like, like I'd love to see it, I'd love to see something where you can basically just plug in a few variables and it generates you a propensity score for the user to do X or Y. But I've seen a lot of kind of products claiming that they can do this with just sort of vague references to AI and machine learning, but I haven't seen this working, in a sort of any way generic way. And actually, also I've seen a lot of good companies with smart engineers and data scientists kind of struggle to build, propensity or prediction models which are much more accurate than just flipping a coin. These are hard problems to solve. I'm not saying that that it's not possible to get there, but they're tricky. So back to your kind of question. I think you raised a couple of specific ones there, like so propensity to churn, propensity to lapse, right? Like so. I'm all for being pragmatic, right? Like we got pretty far at SoundCloud when I was there and running the retention team, just with like a fairly basic model, which wasn't AI prediction or anything like this. We just literally looked at the whole user base, and we kind of mapped out like, okay, like if we would contact people and try and get them back into the app, how many days should they be inactive? Like, and we just basically literally just mapped out like the graph of like, okay, if we contact them 1 day later, like they're pretty likely to come back, right? If we contact them 3 days later, they're a bit less likely to come back. If we contact them 5 days later, they're even less likely. And that will always be the case, right? You'll see that kind of drop off. But what we wanted to look at was like, what is the right kind of frequency to try a sort of reactivation or re-engagement message that has a kind of a bit of a step change if you leave it later, that like actually like a lot of people just don't come back. And with SoundCloud, we found about 5 days was like a pretty good way to do that, just for an average, right? But that's not a propensity scoring system. That's just like how we figured out how to do a very generic reactivation timing. Now, if you're going to do like scoring on that stuff, I think like then you can really do it down to like user specific level, right? Because ideally you want to be looking at like the natural usage frequency of specific users. Probably you can cluster them into a few different segments if you don't want to do like user level segmentation, but you kind of want to look at that user's history. Maybe they've been around for a while, and maybe they only come once or twice a week, and maybe that user, they're just very active on weekends, for example. Maybe they're working really hard during the week. Maybe there's another user who's unemployed and they're on it like almost 24 hours a day, and you can, you don't want to necessarily treat those two users the same. So something that actually looks at their sort of history and then tries to sort of project that forward is, that's kind of how these models typically work. But yeah, and then you can kind of come to like a better understanding of like when's the right time to interact. But it's hard to do that modeling in a way which works well. And then like with the purchasing, I think there's kind of another way you can look at that, again, without going into super deep like machine learning approach. And like the way that we look at it, and we've had some success at Phiture, is to go with a kind of an intent model. Like we're looking for any signs of intent to purchase, which you can kind of break down into a few different kind of levels of intent. Have they ever like clicked on a feature which is like kind of behind the paywall? Like have they kind of investigated things which are like actually paid features, just to sort of in their course of using the app, right? And if they have done that, they've at least shown like some interest in stuff that you're charging for. Right. If they've actually kind of interacted with the paywall at all, albeit that they didn't actually end up making an in-app purchase or going for a subscription, that would indicate a good level of purchase propensity. Like, if they've started a free trial and then dropped out, right, like, that could be a good indication that there's a high propensity to purchase. You just haven't got them across the line yet. So I would argue you can get pretty far with that kind of logic before going into, again, like a sort of a trying to build a deep machine learning model. Like, not that I've got anything against machine learning.
Yeah.
We're also building these kind of models here at Phiture. It's just like, I know from personal experience they're hard, and I've also seen a lot of companies sink a lot of time into them and not get an awful lot of value out of them.
I'm curious, what have been some of the most surprising things you've seen when you've tested in-app messaging?
So with in-app messaging specifically, I mean, I think we already touched on, like, the crazy impact that we see. Like it's really been pretty impressive. Like, I remember even from like SoundCloud days, like, and that I guess comes to my second thing. I mean, we see crazy conversion anyway for all the reasons I just described. I mean, you're getting in someone's face while you've got their attention. You will get a lot of people clicking on the call to action. You will be able to drive people to places in the app that they maybe never were before. I guess another thing which I've been sort of consistently impressed or surprised by, perhaps, is how willing people are to answer questions, and like, whether that's a full-on survey with lots of questions in it, or just like a sort of a mini survey, like the intent collection that I mentioned earlier, where you might just ask them a single question with a multiple choice. People actually really like being asked for their opinion about things. An app doesn't often ask them, like for some input from themselves. Like, it's mostly they're just consuming content from the app, and people respond very well to it. And I'd say particularly, we see a lot of these apps, and I'm from the mobile app development space. I used to make mobile video games. That was kind of my background. But so I'm very much familiar with the the concept of a techie company, or even a lone developer, sitting in a dark room coding something away. Content recommendation always works really well. I mentioned the Blinkist example. That was very untargeted. That was like their first test into that. I think they're building out more targeted recommendations now. And finally, I think one thing which is maybe not surprising exactly, but something which you have to learn when you're using in-apps, is this idea of having trigger points. Like, it's not just that you target the segment and then everyone in that segment receives it. You've got a segment target. So let's say I'm targeting, I don't know, new users on their third day, right? So the only people eligible to receive that campaign are people who are seen in the app on their third day. But then I have a trigger point as well. So let's say the trigger point is, we trigger the message when they add something to the shopping basket, and an add to cart event. And so then my reach suddenly is much lower on that message, because not only am I seeing just users on the third day, but it's actually a much smaller subset of those users, because it's only those who hit the trigger point. And I think when you're doing calculating, for example, like, how long it's going to take for an experiment to reach significance, or how many users are going to be exposed to a certain experiment treatment, it's important to be able to bear that stuff in mind, because that's very different from a push notification or an email that you're blasting to the entire segment.
Sounds like if your reach is so small, then there's just no point, right? If it's just so down funnel, and
also that it's unpredictable, because you don't know how many people are going to trigger that event on a given day. And you might have historical data that should be able to give you an idea, but still, there's an element of unpredictability about this channel.
And for an app that has never done in-app messaging before, where do you recommend they begin? What should they look for in terms of infrastructure, or what would their lowest hanging fruit be for an app that's never done this before?
Good point. So infrastructure, I really don't advise like trying to build it yourself. If you're really on a budget, I think even Firebase supports in-app messaging now. If you're really on a budget and you're just starting out building a simple app, I think it's a good place to start, and it's got a bunch of functionality which is quite helpful to developers. And then in terms of low-hanging fruit, like where to start testing your first messages, I really advise like working on the onboarding flow. You can do this thing called adaptive onboarding, which I've kind of already alluded to, where you just target you figure out what are your kind of key features, your key screens in the app, things that you would want any new user to go and experience, and that you see kind of tied to like better activation rates, and then literally just target users who haven't done those things and educate them about them, and ideally deep link them to those features of those screens, with the CTA button. And if you just do that, if you use the built-in message templates, which probably don't look super native for you, you can still probably get impact above and beyond what you'd have without running those campaigns. And then I guess the sort of a next step would be to build some like custom templates. I'm going to give a little plug now for a Phiture. We've built an in-app message studio, which basically allows people to build like super native looking templates. We call it Blender. And that's super helpful for folks who just don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of like coding HTML and CSS.
Yeah.
But you can just build them yourself. You just need some front-end experience.
Indeed, and we'll link to Blender in the show notes and the transcript
Awesome.
for people to check out as well. Andy, this has been such a privilege to have you on the Mobile User Acquisition Show. I want to be respectful of your time. Where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Andy Carvell. You can check out Phiture, which is the mobile growth consultancy, which I co-founded, which is www.phiture.com, phiture.com. And there's information about Blender on there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy, for being on this show.
Thank you, Shemant. It's been a pleasure.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog. Thank you.